The restaurant was perfect. Dim lighting, expensive wine, the kind of place that whispered success. I sat at the head table, finally celebrating my promotion to senior director after 8 years of grinding. My team surrounded me, laughing and chatting. Then VP Stefan stood up, wineglass in hand. "Let's raise a glass to Natalie," he announced, his voice cutting through the warm atmosphere. "The queen of delegation." The room went silent. My stomach dropped like a stone. He continued with that fake smile plastered on his face. "She's really mastered the art of making other people do the work while she takes the credit." Scattered, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. My face burned with embarrassment. This wasn't a toast. It was a public execution disguised as humor. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction. I forced my lips into a small smile and lifted my wineglass. "Thank you, Stefan," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the fire raging inside me. I took a sip and set the glass down with perfect composure. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The promotion I'd worked so hard for suddenly felt tainted. Stefan had made sure of that. I kept that polite smile glued to my face for the rest of the dinner, nodding and laughing at the right moments. But inside I was cracking apart like ice on a frozen lake. Everyone knew Stefan had just humiliated me. The sideways glances and awkward silences confirmed it. My promotion, something I'd earned through countless late nights and successful projects, was now painted as undeserved. Like I was some manipulator who used people. The truth was different. I'd grown up in a small town where nothing came easy. My parents worked factory jobs to put me through college. I started at this company as a junior analyst, working twice as hard as everyone else just to prove I belonged. No family connections, no special treatment. Just grit and determination. Every promotion had been earned through results. I'd turned around failing projects, mentored struggling team members, and delivered numbers that spoke for themselves. I believed merit would eventually win. Tonight was supposed to be proof of that belief. Instead, Stefan had crushed it with one cruel toast. As I sat there, something died inside me, the hope for his approval. But something else was born. Something harder and more calculating. For the first time, I stopped thinking about earning respect and started thinking about taking power. Monday morning arrived like nothing had happened. Stefan breezed into the office with his usual confidence, greeting everyone with that practiced charm. When he passed my desk, he gave me a casual nod. "Great dinner Friday night," he said, as if he'd given a heartfelt speech instead of publicly shaming me. I smiled back. It was memorable. During our team meeting, he struck again. When I presented the quarterly results, numbers that exceeded every target, he interrupted with a backhanded compliment. "Natalie really knows how to look good on paper," he told the room, his tone suggesting there was more beneath the surface. "She's got a real talent for packaging information." The implication was clear. I was all style, no substance. A few team members shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded along, accepting his narrative. That's when I realized Friday night wasn't a one-time thing. It was a strategy. Stefan was systematically undermining my credibility, making it seem like my success was somehow artificial. He was too smart to attack me directly, so he used civility as a weapon. I took notes during that meeting, but not about the agenda items. I started documenting something else entirely. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing patterns I'd ignored before. Stefan had a genius for subtle sabotage. In leadership meetings, he'd reroute decisions I'd made. "Let me just double-check Natalie's approach here," he'd say, then present a slightly different version as his own improvement. When my projects succeeded, he'd reassign credit. "The team really pulled together on this one," he'd announce, somehow making my individual contributions disappear into group effort. His favorite weapon was reframing my strengths as weaknesses. "She's more of a people person than a strategist," he'd say, making empathy sound like incompetence. Or, "Natalie brings great energy to the room," which somehow implied I lacked substance. It was death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Each comment seemed harmless alone, but together they painted a picture of someone who was likable but not leadership material. The worst part was how expertly he did it. Never directly attacking, always with a smile, always with just enough plausible deniability to seem supportive. Anyone calling him out would look paranoid or oversensitive. But I was watching now, taking mental notes, learning his playbook. That Thursday, I met my former mentor, Angela, for drinks at our usual spot downtown. Angela had retired as a VP 2 years ago after a brilliant 30-year career. She was the one person I trusted completely. "Stefan's trying to destroy my reputation," I told her, explaining the promotion dinner and everything that followed. Angela sipped her martini and listened without interruption. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy or outrage. Instead, she leaned forward with sharp eyes. "Power never concedes anything without a plan," she said calmly. "Stefan sees you as a threat. That toast wasn't random, it was strategic. He's positioning himself as your superior before you can challenge him. So what do I do? Stop playing defense. You can't win by being nice or hoping people will see through him. You need to build your own narrative." She pulled out a small notebook and slid it toward me. "Start documenting everything. Not for HR complaints or emotional venting. For strategy. Every slight, every success he tries to steal, every time he undermines you. Information is power." I picked up the notebook, feeling its weight. "Think like a chess player, not a victim," Angela added. "He made the first move. Now it's your turn." I started carrying that notebook everywhere. Not obviously, just a small black book that looked like standard meeting notes. But every entry was strategic fuel. Tuesday, Stefan interrupted my client presentation 3 times to clarify points I'd already made clearly. Wednesday, took credit for the Morrison account strategy in front of the board, calling it our collaborative approach. Friday, made joke about my impressive PowerPoint skills when I presented budget analysis. I framed it as performance tracking when anyone asked. Just trying to be more organized about my contributions, I'd say. People respected that kind of professional development. But these weren't just notes. They were building blocks of a larger strategy I was still forming. Each entry showed a pattern of behavior that went beyond personality conflicts. This was systematic professional sabotage. The notebook gave me something Stefan didn't expect: patience. Instead of reacting emotionally to his next attack, I'd simply record it and look for the deeper pattern. Angela was right. Information was power, and I was collecting it one careful entry at a time. The game had changed. I just wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Stefan had a golden boy. Jake Collins, 28 years old, with perfect teeth and MBA. Confidence. Stefan paraded him around like a future executive, bringing him to high-level meetings and introducing him as one of our rising stars. Jake was charismatic and ambitious, the kind of guy who could charm clients and impress board members. Stefan clearly saw him as a protégé and potential ally in his empire building. But I saw something else. An opportunity. I started mentoring Jake quietly. Nothing obvious, just offering guidance when he seemed stressed, sharing industry insights during coffee breaks, helping him navigate office politics without making it seem like formal coaching. The Morrison presentation went really well, I told him after a client meeting. Your analysis of their supply chain issues was spot on. Have you thought about expanding that approach to other accounts? Jake lit up. These were the kinds of strategic conversations Stefan never had with him. Stefan was too focused on using Jake as a trophy to actually develop his skills. Slowly, Jake started coming to me with questions. Real questions about leadership, strategy, and career development. The kind of mentoring every ambitious young professional craves but rarely receives. I was planting seeds, knowing Stefan had no idea his golden boy was looking elsewhere for real guidance. 3 weeks later, Jake knocked on my office door looking defeated. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by frustration and confusion. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Stefan had just thrown him under the bus on the Henderson project. When the client raised concerns about timeline delays, Stefan immediately pointed to Jake's analysis as the source of confusion, claiming he'd trusted his junior analyst's assessment when making promises. "He threw me under the bus," Jake said, slumping in the chair across from my desk. I did exactly what he asked, used his framework, followed his instructions, but when it went sideways, suddenly it was all my fault. I nodded, remembering similar experiences from my own career. "That's tough. How are you feeling about it?" "Like I can't trust him," Jake admitted. "This isn't the first time, you know? When things go well, he takes credit. When they don't, I'm the problem." Another crack had formed in Stefan's foundation. His golden boy was starting to see through the facade. I didn't need to push or manipulate. I just listened and let Jake draw his own conclusions. "What would you do?" he asked. "I'd focus on building my own track record," I said carefully. "Make sure your contributions are visible to people beyond just Stefan." Jake nodded thoughtfully. The seed was planted. 2 months later, whispers of a corporate restructure began circulating. Budget pressures and market changes meant leadership roles would be consolidated and redefined. Most people worried about their job security. Stefan saw opportunity to expand his influence. He started positioning himself as indispensable, taking credit for every departmental success and distancing himself from failures. Then I got an unexpected phone call. "Natalie? It's Michael Ross." Michael was the consultant Angela had recommended to the board for organizational review. He'd worked with our company before and knew the culture. I'd met him briefly at company events, but we'd never worked together directly. "I'm helping with the restructure planning," he said. "Your name came up as someone with deep institutional knowledge and strategic thinking. Would you be interested in providing input on the future org chart?" My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm. "I'd be happy to help however I can." "Great. Can we meet tomorrow? I'd like your perspective on departmental effectiveness and leadership development." After hanging up, I realized Angela's network was still working behind the scenes. This wasn't luck, it was strategy paying off. Stefan thought the restructure would reinforce his power. He had no idea the game board was being redesigned by someone else entirely. The next day, I sat across from Michael in a quiet conference room, away from the main office. He had folders spread across the table. Organizational charts, performance metrics, budget analyses. "Walk me through your department," he said. "What's working? What isn't?" I spoke carefully, focusing on systems and processes rather than personalities. I talked about communication gaps, duplicated efforts, and missed opportunities for cross-functional collaboration. When he asked about leadership effectiveness, I shared specific examples of projects that succeeded despite poor coordination and others that failed due to unclear direction. "Stefan seems to have strong relationships with senior management," Michael observed. "He's very good at managing up," I agreed. "The question is whether that translates to effective team leadership and sustainable results." I never attacked Stefan directly. Instead, I painted a picture of an organization that needed better integration between strategy and execution, clearer accountability structures, and more effective talent development. Michael took extensive notes. As we wrapped up, he asked, "If you were redesigning this structure, what would it look like?" I'd been preparing for that question for weeks. My answer was thoughtful, data-driven, and completely excluded Stefan from the power structure he'd built around himself. He was reshaping his own elimination, and he had no idea. The first sign of change came through budget cuts. Stefan burst into Monday's leadership meeting fuming about a 20% reduction in his division's funding. "This makes no sense," he ranted. "We're the highest performing department. Why are we being penalized?" I sat quietly, taking notes like always. When he looked to me for support, I offered a neutral response. "I guess they're reallocating based on performance metrics," I said with a perfectly straight face. "Maybe they're trying to invest in areas with higher growth potential." Stefan's face darkened. He'd expected sympathy or outrage from his fellow leaders. Instead, he got bureaucratic logic that he couldn't argue against. Later, I learned the budget cuts weren't random. They were strategic moves to reduce Stefan's resource control before the bigger organizational changes. Michael and the board were methodically weakening his position. Stefan spent the rest of the meeting trying to justify his budget needs, but the decision was already made. I watched him scramble with quiet satisfaction. The man who'd made a career of undermining others was finally feeling what it was like to be on the receiving end. The restructure was still months away, but the groundwork was being laid one budget line at a time. Jake appeared at my office door again, but this time he looked angry rather than defeated. "Is it true Stefan tried to block your first promotion?" he asked, closing the door firmly behind him. I paused, wondering how he'd learned that. Then I realized, office networks have long memories, and Jake had been asking questions about company history. "Why do you ask?" because I found an old email thread when I was looking for project files. He sent a message to HR suggesting you lacked the gravitas for leadership 3 years ago. My stomach tightened. I'd never seen that email, but it explained why my first promotion had taken so long despite clear qualifications. Stefan had been undermining me for years. That's ancient history, I said carefully. No, it's not, Jake said firmly. It's a pattern. He does this to everyone who threatens him. First you, now me, probably others I don't know about. Jake's loyalty was shifting before my eyes. The golden boy was seeing his mentor's true nature, and it disgusted him. What are you going to do about it? I asked. I'm done being his puppet, Jake said. I want real mentorship, not manipulation. Another piece of Stefan's foundation crumbled. His own protégé was turning against him, and he didn't even know it yet. 2 weeks later, Jake submitted a formal request to transfer to my team. When Stefan got the paperwork, he stormed into my office with barely controlled rage. What did you do? He demanded, waving the transfer request. I supported a talent employee's career development, I replied calmly. Isn't that what good leaders do? Stefan's jaw clenched. Jake is on my team, he reports to me. He requested the transfer himself. He said he wanted real mentorship. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Stefan forced a laugh, but his eyes had gone cold. Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Jake can be challenging to manage. I'm sure we'll figure it out, I said with a smile. After Stefan left, I felt a surge of quiet triumph. His golden boy had chosen me over him. The message was clear. Stefan's leadership style was driving away his best talent. Jake's transfer wouldn't be approved for another month, but the psychological victory was immediate. Stefan's empire was shrinking, and everyone could see it. The man who'd built his career on controlling others was losing control, one defection at a time. The quarterly employee satisfaction surveys went out in March. Most people treated them as routine bureaucracy, but I saw opportunity. Make sure everyone takes the survey seriously. I told my team during our weekly meeting, honest feedback helps the company improve. Stefan took a different approach. In his team meeting, which I heard about through Jake, he dismissed the surveys entirely. People always complain, he said with a wave of his hand. These things don't mean anything. HR just needs to check boxes for compliance. The difference in our approaches wasn't accidental. I knew the survey data would feed into the organizational review Michael was conducting. Every piece of feedback would become part of the larger picture of leadership effectiveness. Stefan's dismissive attitude meant his team would either skip the survey or provide minimal responses. My team would give thoughtful, detailed feedback because they believed it mattered. When the results came back, the contrast would be obvious. High engagement and satisfaction in my department, lower participation, and more complaints in Stefan's area. I wasn't manipulating the data, I was simply encouraging honesty. But in the larger game of organizational politics, honesty was becoming my most powerful weapon. The call came at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Michael's voice was quiet but urgent. The board has requested a comprehensive review of departmental morale and leadership effectiveness, he said. I need to be discreet about this, but I'd like your input. My heart raced. This was what we'd been building toward. Of course, how can I help? I need someone with ground-level perspective to help me understand the real dynamics, not just the numbers, but the human element. I met Michael at a coffee shop across town the next evening. I brought my notebook, not the obvious one, but the detailed records I'd been keeping for months. I shared anonymized observations about communication patterns, decision-making processes, and team dynamics. I talked about what motivated high performers and what drove talented people away. There's a pattern of top-down management that doesn't develop talent, I explained. People feel used rather than mentored. They produce results but don't grow professionally. Michael took careful notes. He was building a case for organizational change, and my observations provided the human evidence to support the financial data. By the end of our conversation, it was clear the restructure would address more than just budget issues. It would reshape the entire leadership culture. Stefan's days were numbered, and he still didn't know it. The breaking point came during a leadership meeting in April. I'd presented a proposal for expanding our client retention program, a data-driven strategy that could increase revenue by 15%. The room was engaged. Questions came from around the table, all positive and constructive. Then Stefan spoke up. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice cutting through the energy. "Natalie loves her spreadsheets, but don't mistake data analysis for real leadership." The room went silent. This wasn't subtle undermining. This was a direct attack. I stayed calm, pulling up another slide. "The data shows clear patterns in client behavior," I said evenly. "Would you like to see the specific metrics that support these recommendations?" Stefan's face reddened. "Numbers don't tell the whole story. Leadership requires intuition, relationship building, understanding people. Not everything fits into your neat little formulas." I nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right that relationships matter. That's why I interviewed 23 clients directly before building this analysis. Their feedback is actually the foundation of these recommendations." The room shifted. Several people sat forward, suddenly more interested. I'd just proven that my spreadsheet analysis was actually based on deep client relationships, exactly what Stefan claimed I lacked. Stefan realized he'd overplayed his hand, but it was too late. The mask had slipped and everyone saw it. 3 days later, I walked into HR carrying a single red folder. Inside was a year's worth of documentation, organized and professional. "Team performance, year-over-year leadership influence analysis," read the label. "I've been tracking some patterns that might be useful for the organizational review," I told the HR director. Nothing accusatory, just observations about what drives team performance. The folder contained no complaints or personal attacks. Instead, it showed correlation between leadership styles and measurable outcomes: employee retention, project success rates, client satisfaction scores, team productivity metrics. The data told a clear story without me having to say anything critical about Stefan directly. High-performing teams correlated with collaborative leadership. Struggling teams showed patterns of top-down control and individual credit-taking. "This is very thorough," the HR director said, flipping through the pages. "We'll make sure this gets to the right people." I left that meeting knowing I'd just armed the board with objective evidence for whatever decisions they were preparing to make. Stefan had spent months undermining me with subtle attacks. I'd responded with careful documentation and strategic patience. Now the truth was in the hands of people who could act on it. By May, Stefan knew something was wrong. The signs were everywhere. Fewer invitations to planning meetings, delayed responses to his emails, key projects being reassigned without explanation. When he learned the restructure might eliminate his role entirely, panic set in. He started making desperate moves, trying to charm HR and hint that I was overreaching my position. "Natalie's great with details," he told anyone who would listen, "but she might be getting ahead of herself thinking strategically." But I'd already played that move, weeks ago. When HR came to me asking about Stefan's concerns, I was ready. "Stefan's feedback is always valuable," I said diplomatically. "I think we all want what's best for the company. If he has specific concerns about any of my work, I'm happy to address them directly." My response was perfect, professional, non-defensive, and subtly highlighting that Stefan was going around me instead of addressing issues directly, exactly the kind of poor leadership behavior the board was evaluating. HR made notes and moved on. Stefan's attempt at sabotage had backfired, making him look petty and unprofessional. The hunter had become the hunted, and he was making all the classic mistakes. The final nail came from an unexpected source, an exit interview. Marcus Thompson, a talented analyst who'd worked under Stefan for 2 years, was leaving for a better opportunity. During his final HR interview, he was asked about his experience with leadership. "Stefan's a brilliant manipulator," Marcus said bluntly. "He'll charm you in meetings and throw you under the bus when it serves him. I watched him do it to colleagues, and eventually he did it to me." The comment went straight into the board file. I didn't need to add anything to Marcus's assessment. He'd said everything that needed saying. Other exit interviews from Stefan's department showed similar patterns. Words like unsupportive, takes credit, and plays favorites appeared repeatedly. Meanwhile, people leaving my team used phrases like great mentor, developed my skills, and trusted me with real responsibility. The narrative was writing itself. Stefan's reputation for charm and polish couldn't overcome the consistent pattern of employee feedback about his actual leadership behavior. I learned about Marcus's interview through the office grapevine, but I wasn't surprised. The truth has a way of surfacing when people feel safe to tell it. Stefan started noticing the isolation in June. Fewer emails in his inbox, meetings scheduled without him, conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. He wasn't imagining it. The organizational freeze-out was real and systematic. His pet project, a client acquisition strategy he'd been promoting for months, was quietly shelved. When he asked about it, he was told it was under review and would be revisited later. Everyone knew what that meant. Later meant never. The air around Stefan had changed. People were polite but distant, professional but cold. His jokes didn't land the same way. His opinions carried less weight in meetings. He tried to fight back, working longer hours and inserting himself into more projects. But it felt like swimming against a tide that was pulling him away from the center of power. The man who'd built his career on reading office politics was experiencing what it felt like to be on the wrong side of those dynamics. I watched from a distance, neither celebrating nor interfering. The consequences of his behavior were playing out naturally, driven by systems and decisions he couldn't control or manipulate. The official announcement came in July, a comprehensive review of leadership effectiveness across all departments. Stefan was notified along with everyone else, but the email felt different when it was addressed to you personally. The board was evaluating individual leaders, not just organizational structure. Stefan tried to spin it as routine corporate bureaucracy, but everyone knew better. You don't launch expensive leadership reviews unless there are serious concerns. He scheduled one-on-one meetings with every board member he could reach, trying to reinforce his value and address whatever concerns might exist. But it was too late. The board already had months of data, feedback, and observations. Stefan's charm offensive looked desperate rather than confident. Meanwhile, I focused on my regular work, delivering results and supporting my team. When board members asked for my input, I provided thoughtful analysis without seeming eager or political. The contrast was obvious, Stefan scrambling to protect his position while I continued producing quality work. He'd triggered the review process with his behavior toward me. Now that process was consuming him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The end came quietly, wrapped in corporate politeness. Stefan received an email inviting him to explore new opportunities that better matched his evolving career interests. The language was careful and respectful, framed as recognizing his contributions while transitioning to new challenges. Everyone understood what it really meant. He was being pushed out. There was no dramatic firing, no confrontation, no public humiliation. Just a quiet purge disguised as career development. Stefan cleaned out his office on a Thursday afternoon when most people were in meetings. No farewell party, no goodbye speeches. Just a box of personal belongings and a security escort to the parking garage. Jake texted me from across the building. He's gone. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief? Certainly. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but also sadness that it had come to this. Stefan's downfall wasn't caused by a single dramatic event. It was the result of consistent behavior patterns that finally caught up with him. I'd simply documented the truth and waited for the system to respond. The king was dead. Long live whoever came next. 2 weeks after Stefan's departure, I was called into the CEO's office. On the table was an offer letter for head of strategic operations. Essentially Stefan's role, expanded and redefined. "We've been impressed with your leadership during this transition," the CEO said. "The board believes you're the right person to reshape our approach to team development and strategic planning." I accepted the role, but with one condition. I wanted to implement a company-wide leadership development program focused on ethical management and employee growth. "We need to create a culture where talent is developed, not exploited," I explained, "where success comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." They agreed immediately. The board had learned from Stefan's tenure that toxic leadership, no matter how charming, ultimately damaged the organization. My first week in the new role was spent meeting with team leads across departments, listening to concerns and ideas for improvement. Everything Stefan had represented, The politics, the manipulation, the zero-sum thinking was being systematically replaced with collaboration and genuine development. The revolution was complete, and it had happened through patience, documentation, and strategic thinking rather than dramatic confrontation. 3 months into my new role, I organized an off-site retreat for the leadership team. We rented a conference center by the lake, away from the office and its accumulated tensions. On the final evening, we gathered in a circle for open discussion about leadership lessons learned. "I want to share something personal," I began. "Last year, someone publicly humiliated me at what should have been a celebration. It was devastating, but it taught me something important about power and how to use it." I told them the whole story. Stefan's toast, the systematic undermining, the quiet campaign to document and address his behavior. "Leadership isn't about how loud you are in a room," I said. "It's about how people feel after you leave it. Do they feel inspired and supported, or diminished and used?" The room was completely silent. Several people nodded, recognizing their own experiences in the story. "I'm not sharing this to criticize the past, but to build our future. We have a choice about what kind of culture we create here." The conversation that followed was honest and transformative. People shared their own experiences with toxic leadership and made commitments to do better. By the end of the evening, we'd established new principles for how we wanted to lead and be led. Later that night, I sat at the hotel bar, processing the day's conversations. The retreat had exceeded my expectations, creating real connections and commitments to change. A folded piece of paper appeared beside my drink. Jake slid into the seat next to me. "I wanted to give you this before we head back tomorrow," he said. I unfolded the note. In Jake's handwriting, "Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. You saved my career and taught me how to save others." I smiled, folding the note carefully and putting it in my pocket. Not as a trophy or proof of victory, but as a reminder of why the whole struggle had been worth it. Stefan's cruel toast at my promotion dinner had been designed to diminish me, to make me feel small and unworthy. Instead, it had awakened something stronger. It taught me that real power doesn't come from tearing others down, it comes from building them up. That sustainable success isn't about winning at others' expense, but creating systems where everyone can thrive. The woman who'd sat quietly through that humiliating toast was gone. In her place was a leader who understood that the best revenge isn't personal destruction, it's becoming everything your enemies said you could never be. And that transformation had backfired on Stefan in ways he never could have imagined.